everybody being on the program. So I think it's good that people have this kind of interest in mental health and trying to improve people's lives through that. And a lot of educators I know that signed in here to be part of this program, and so that's just great. So with that, I'd also like to kind of give everybody a little feel for why we're doing this. Last spring, we had some people that got together that thought that Iowa State University needed to look for ways to help people get through the pandemic or do programming after the pandemic. And we had some initiatives put together. And our regional 4 directors up here in North Iowa decided to try to do something on mental health. And so I want to thank our extension directors, Michelle Sackville at Franklin County, Darla Olson in Mitchell County, Leslie Mayman at Floyd, and then also Saragordo County Extension Director Sarah DeVore, who just gave birth to a brand new baby daughter here not too long ago. So that's really good. And then the 6 initiatives were identified last spring, and that was a special committee that was organized last probably April, May, June. I happened to be headed up by our regional director, that's Donovan Olson. And Donovan put that committee together to come up with 6 identified initiatives that Iowa State University would try to tackle to solve problems, whether it be mental health like today, or it might be something with financial management or food insecurity, or all of those things kind of were looked at. And 6 things were identified. And it turns out that across the state of Iowa in extension, we had about, I would say probably a high percentage of counties had mental health as one of their top 3 priorities as far as initiatives are concerned. So really thinking we're really hitting the right kind of a topic and subject matter today. And we're very happy to think that we've got 3 excellent speakers to help us out with that. And so I'm going to let you know that our first speaker happens to be the person that's leading up the mental health I team, because there was a team put together that wants to identify that topic. And that turns out to be Dr. David Brown, our behavioral management specialist on campus. And David is going to talk to us about compassion fatigue today, and also talk to us about how to avoid burnout, because a lot of things like that are happening because of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 issues that everybody's dealing with, as our world got turned upside down back in March 16th, I guess it was. And so it's been a long time that we've been dealing with this, and hopefully going to get past here. But David's going to give us some ideas of how to avoid that compassion fatigue that might be setting in with healthcare providers, loved ones that are taking care of folks with COVID-19. And so I'll just let David have the floor. And so thank you, David, for being here.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and all the folks that were involved in organizing this. I mean, it's just a really an honor to be here with all of you today. But we're going to talk a little bit about stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue, because I think we're all feeling a little bit of that during this pandemic. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about, because of all the stress we're experiencing, we're going to talk about how to be a little bit more prepared to help yourself and maybe even others who are distressed. We're going to review some of the burnout and compassion fatigue. We're going to talk about some strategies or some ways to help cope with some stress and burnout and compassion fatigue. And we're also going to determine how to take action to help yourself and others. And we're going to look at some resources you may want to access as well. But what we first have to do is we need to talk about what stress is. Now, stress is simply a response to some type of stressor, like receiving some type of bad news or experiencing a pandemic. Now, unfortunately, our brain and body does not know the difference between being threatened by a saber-toothed tiger or being late for work, or even maybe even having a machinery breakdown during harvest, things like that. But our brain in any of those responses quickly responds by either being prepared to jump into a fight or run away quickly. And in those ways, our ancestors were much more likely to survive. But this response, our bodily response, causes the body to produce stress-related chemicals that make the heart beat faster, our muscles tense, our eyes dilated, the blood is shunted away from the midsection, and the mucous membranes dry up. All so we can fight harder, run faster, see better, and breathe easier if we would without this response. But here's the problem with that. If this stress response can be damaging to our health if it's experienced over and over and over again over prolonged periods of time. So what happens is this flooding of stress chemicals happens, our brain and body changes, and the brain gets accustomed to this danger survival cycle. and often floods the body with these stress-related chemicals at the first sign of any kind of threat, even if the threat is long gone. And that's when it becomes dangerous or toxic. So, again, after stress is experienced over longer periods, our bodies start to show these type of physical responses, which can eventually progress into more serious issues: high blood pressure, muscle tension, stomach upset, diarrhea, constipation, breathing more rapidly, all signs, physical responses to these stress chemicals that are flooding our body. Now, if those physical and other responses to stress continue, serious wear and tear on the body can occur. And that's why chronic stress is a risk factor for heart attacks, weight gain, stroke, and diabetes. Individuals can become more prone to severe viral infections such as the flu or common cold as our immune system deteriorates. And obviously, that's probably not a good thing to happen during a pandemic. But it's also a risk factor for depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicide. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But we also need to talk about burnout, because I'm hearing from more and more people telling me how hard they are working and how long of hours they are working related to the pandemic. And so we have some issues, not only stress issues, but issues at work, because we're working so hard to try to manage this pandemic and things like that. But burnout is it's related to where you work. Now, work conditions what's involved in burnout is the work conditions that are stressful, such as long hours, high demands, very high workload. Burnout is not trauma related, like we're going to talk about in compassion fatigue, but often displays some of those same signs of chronic distress, including exhaustion and cynicism. Now, the onset of burnout is a little bit more gradual, kind of sneaks up on you during the course of where you work. Now, one of the things that happens in burnout situations that you kind of need to evaluate your work options, since both organizational and individual changes are needed. So, this is maybe a time that you need to maybe dialogue with your supervisor to look for solutions or compromises. Maybe try to set goals for what can wait, what must get done now. But there's also a point that this to deal with burnout may require a change in occupation or job, or maybe even different organizations because of the conditions involved in where you work. Now I want to talk a little bit about compassion fatigue. Now, compassion fatigue is really for those individuals, or related to those individuals that are involved in the helping professions, with, many of us are. And if you think about extension, our job is to provide, research-based education, and we're helping individuals through some of the work we provide and information we provide. But I love this quote from Charles Figley, who's a key researcher in compassion fatigue. And what he says compassion fatigue is mental weariness resulting from exertion that is associated with tending to the emotional and physical pain of others. So I want you to think about how the COVID is impacting our country and our healthcare professions. Think about those nurses and doctors working in the ICUs and dealing directly with COVID patients. Thinking about all the other individuals working in nursing facilities who may be helping others, or who may be dealing with COVID. Thinking about all the deaths that the hospitals are seeing related to COVID. And you can kind of see how this pandemic could certainly be wearing on our helping professionals that are dealing with COVID. Again, compassion fatigue is associated with the type of work you do, but can also coexist with burnout, which I think is maybe we're starting to see in some of our helping professionals that are dealing with COVID. But it's often connected with being traumatized while trying to help. For example, many times you'll see compassion fatigue being associated with those that are working on disasters or working with individuals traumatized by disasters. But again, we're in the pandemic, so some of the same factors are taking place. Or compassion fatigue could be related to simply the person really and deeply cares about the people that they're trying to take care of. The onset of compassion fatigue is a little bit more rapid, but fortunately, it's fairly easily treated. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Here's kind of signs of compassion fatigue. We see withdrawal, numbness, hypervigilance, sleep problems, all these other issues that you can see on the screen. But one of the most serious components of compassion fatigue is what we call secondary traumatic distress. And what that is means that sometimes compassion fatigue, you'll see some similarities to some of the same symptoms found in post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you see here, we've got hypervigilance, some avoidance, things like that, emotional reactivity. We see that also in individuals that may be experiencing some type of secondary traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. But again, there's some things that individuals can do to protect against this. Now, one of the first things individuals can do to help manage compassion fatigue, maybe even burnout, is basically self-awareness, self-monitoring. And you can do that by accessing this tool in this website. Now, this is basically an access to a tool called the Professional Quality of Life Measure. And it's a 30-question measure focused on not only compassion fatigue, but also compassion satisfaction. And some of the example questions here, like I find it difficult to separate my personal life from my own life. I feel depressed because of the traumatic experience of the people that I'm trying to help. But it's a really great tool that you can kind of do some self-monitoring, self-checks on where you are in your helping profession and whether or not you maybe need to do some things to help scale back what you're doing or really focus more on your own professional self-care. And here's some protective factors for compassion fatigue. We know that having a purpose can lead to what we describe as compassion satisfaction. For example, you think about a nurse in an ICU, maybe what he or she is thinking is, what I do is exceptionally hard and it's really, really difficult right now, but I love it. This is what I wanted to do with my life, is help people in very difficult circumstances. So having that purpose is a protective factor. Or even perceiving your work as a dream come true. I mean, how many of you think about your job as a dream job? This is what I've always wanted to do. And that can be a protective factor in compassion fatigue. And the other thing we really need to think about is excellent self-care and well-being. And that's probably the most important thing we can do to not only manage our stress, burnout, but also compassion fatigue. And here's some things that you can do. Number one is excellent self-care and well-being. Deep sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night or per day, depending on your work shift. That is really important. And I put that first because, many of our other things that we do to take care of ourselves kind of depend on us getting a good night's sleep. If you don't get a good night's sleep, maybe you don't feel as much likely to want to exercise or other things. And so getting a deep sleep is one of the most important things we can do as far as excellent self-care. Obviously getting active, eating healthy, avoiding alcohol or illicit drugs, maintaining a routine even during COVID. And certainly for children and youth, maintaining a family routine or some type of school routine is helpful for them to kind of manage the stress and anxiety related to COVID. One of the things I always include in all of my talks is about going on a date with your partner. Now, why is that so important? Because number one, I need to say, I think if you saw my introduction, I'm a licensed marital family therapist. So I've worked with a lot of couples over the year and teach a lot of relationship education programming. And to maintain relationships as intimate relationships like our partner, working with our couples, one of the most important things that people can do is go on a date. Now, I know we don't have that as many options now during a pandemic, but for example, my wife and I have just chosen to maybe bring in food from a restaurant, and then we're starting to watch movies together on Friday nights, movies that really kind of give us a sense of positivity, things like that. We like to watch Hallmark movies. We're kind of old, so we like those Hallmark movies, but you always have a happy ending. So that's kind of one of the things that we do to go on a date, but that's really important for couples and to work with your partner to go on dates. But there's a lot of other strategies, and what I know is the presenters following me are going to go into probably a lot more detail on some of these strategies, and so it's really, these presentations are very, I think, complementary as you participate in them. But things to do: relaxation techniques, deep breathing, finding a joyful place visualization, meditation, many spiritual practices, prayer help us to manage stress. Mindfulness, yoga, journaling are also techniques that and strategies can help us manage our own stress, and certainly help us with burnout and compassion fatigue as well. Other strategies, we need to stay connected with family, friends, and trusted colleagues. We need to make, with the pandemic, we really need to make special efforts to do that. Maybe just using our phone, trying to schedule up video meetings, things like that. But during a pandemic, we really need to make a special effort to kind of maintaining those connections. Find a hobby distinct from work. I did a similar program with a group of veterinarians. And so one of the things I suggested to them was, if you're a veterinarian, you don't want your hobby to be volunteering at an animal shelter. Okay, you need to have a hobby that's distinct from your work and different from your work. Maybe if that's woodworking, fishing, bowling, I don't care. Just make sure it's that the hobby is distinct from your work. It's something different. We also need to set priorities and plan our time, and we need to say no to extra commitments. And I just said no to a commitment this morning, and it made me feel really good. It's something I could have done, but it was a commitment that I said no to and delegated that off to someone else. And so that really because I know that would have taken me extra time to do and probably work on the weekend. And so I said no to that. And I think that was a good thing to do. So we need to say no to some of our extra commitments. And we really need to make a lot active measures to promote work-life balance. Again, with this pandemic, it always seems like we can do more and more and more and more at work to help others. And so we need to make sure that we promote work-life balance. And one of the easiest way to do that is schedule your time off, schedule things, schedule dates with your wife, your spouse, or partner. Make active measures to promote work-life balance. And again, if I don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. So, you can use your own schedule to make sure things like that happen. Other strategies, we know that stress levels and burnout can get to the point where maybe we need some additional help. And so we know that positive attitudes towards mental health care can be a benefit to us. And one of the positions I had a number of years back, I worked for the Air National Guard as a behavioral health provider for the Air National Guard. And I always told folks there is that seeking help is a sign of strength. And so that's one of the attitudes we need to think about if we get in a situation where it's beyond our ability to manage. We may need to seek out some mental health treatment, and that's okay. Many employers also have employee assistance program providers available. Many of them are offering telehealth services, so you don't have to go face-to-face, and that's a really great option. But we also need to think about regular physicals because some of the things that happen while we get stressed are physical, like I said. So maybe a regular physical meeting with your primary care physician is a great thing to do on a regular basis. And mental health care, as I said, if you need it. But also what I want to do now, I want to get into some resources. One of the best resources I know is Iowa Concern Hotline, and this is for anybody in the state of Iowa and beyond who can call into the Iowa Concern Hotline. They have stress counselors available, attorney for legal education, as well as information referral sources for a wide variety topics. And they're available in every county in Iowa and beyond. We actually are working with the North Central region states and providing Iowa Concern Hotline services to them. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at no charge. And so, again, great resources. Language interpretation services are also available if you are not an English speaker. One of a new resource that available is called COVID Recovery Iowa. Iowa State University Extension is one of 5 entities that are contracted with the Iowa Department of Human Services to provide virtual consultation and crisis counseling to all Iowans, any Iowans impacted by COVID-19, which means just about everybody. We're also able to provide family finance consultation and farm financial consultation are also available. So you can visit the website here listed. You can fill out a form and a consultant will get back to you. You can also contact the Iowa Concern Hotline, or the Iowa Warm Line number on the screen is 1-844-775-9276. Those are 3 ways you can access COVID Recovery Iowa services: free virtual crisis counseling or information, and talking with a licensed provider. We actually hired a couple licensed provider just to provide crisis counseling related to COVID Recovery Iowa. Now, we're just talking about some very quick things about very, very minor and quick techniques that you can do to maybe help yourself and others. If you want some more information about other ways to help others, ISU Extension also provides some other programs. One is mental health first aid. Right now, we're providing monthly programs, and we're moving into mental health first aid for youth professionals. So go to the website there. You can register for a class. If you're an ag professional, or work for ISU Extension, there's a code they can use, AgPro, to attend those classes at no cost. Another program that we're providing more than monthly basis, Question, Persuade, Refer, which is a short 1-hour program on suicide prevention. And as you see on the screen, ask a question, save a life. This is the 3-step program that anyone can learn to help prevent suicide. And I think why that's so important is because we've heard predictions of a really spike of suicide deaths due to the COVID pandemic. And what I'm hearing is that is actually taking place. So again, anything we can do to learn more about help others, I think is a good thing for our communities and counties to be able to do that. Again, here's some of the things we talked about. We talked about signs of stress. We talked about the impact of burnout and compassion fatigue. And we talked about strategies for self-care and well-being. We reviewed some helpful resources. So I guess now is the time for questions.
And we didn't get any questions in the chat, so I'm going to take advantage and I'll ask one myself. And I think maybe you hit on this toward the end there, but a lot of us are in service positions where we're out working with others. Give a lot of strategies for kind of dealing with burnout fatigue, or burnout and caregiver fatigue in ourselves. What if we notice that in others? What kind of strategies would you recommend if you see that in someone that we're working with? How do we reach out?
Well, you can start a conversation with them, say, hey, I'm seeing some things, and I'm concerned. And why don't we have a chance to kind of just see what's going on? And I'd be glad to provide some resources. And then, one of the things we always, if you're really concerned about the person, one of the things we always request people to do is you need to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? And even if you just are unsure, and that kind of opens up a lot of opportunities for other discussion points within that person. If they say, no, I'm absolutely not thinking about that, then, maybe you can say, how about we call the Iowa Concern Hotline together, why don't we call the COVID Recovery Iowa together and do something like that. Make sure they have access to that resource and information. But if they are suicidal, then you probably need to do some other things. You need to talk about maybe talking to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline together, maybe taking them to the emergency room or to a mental health provider if the ones some are available. But you need to get help for that person immediately and make sure that they're never alone, and list a family member at all times until they can get that professional help.
All right, well, thank you so much. We'll move on here to, one really quick question, and I think you can address this quickly. Is the Iowa Concern Hotline available for someone out of state? I work with students from South Sioux and students in Sioux City.
It is. It's available. Certainly, we get calls from all over, so it is available for individuals out of state as well.
All right, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Dennis to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, you bet. Good job there, David. A lot of good suggestions as far as things to do to help cope with those two problems of burnout and caretaker fatigue. And I think you're right about sharing a lot of those resources. I think we started that Rural Concerns Hotline in 1985 during the farm crisis, and it's been used for a lot more than that. And so it's a very good resource for sure to reach out to. Okay, our next speaker, I'm very happy to introduce to you, it'll be Dr. Shea Kruger. Kruger. I said Kruger. I'm sorry about that. All your flyers say Jorgensen, don't they? This is Dennis Johnson talking about a nice 4-H'er from our guy who was Shea Kruger at that time, and married now and has a nice young son. And I want to say that she was one of our better 4-H girls for sure, and became a doctor. No surprise that this ever happened, that she did this, and one that reaches out and wants to help people, and that's what she's doing by being with us today. So I want to mention that her topic today, definitely a very appropriate one. It's maintaining wellness and trying to stay as mentally healthy as possible during the coronavirus pandemic. And I think Dr. Jorgensen will be great for that. She's a University of Iowa Department of Psychiatry person that's working there now. But I'm happy to report to you, everybody here in North Iowa, at least up this way, that she's become the chief psychiatrist at Prairie Ridge Treatment Center. I think it's going to be in June. Is that right, Shea?
Yep.
Yeah, so very happy to think you're coming back to North Iowa. Very glad to see that. So very good. And I'll tell you, I'll let you have the floor. So thank you, Shea, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, everyone. And thank you all for taking the time to attend. I know lunch hours are sometimes busy and hectic, so I appreciate that so many of you are here. So before I get into the slides, I wanted to just take a second and we're going to do an exercise together. So I'm just going to invite you to join me on this. And it's your option. Obviously, if you're busy eating or doing something else, you don't have to join us. But I'd like to lead us with just a quick exercise before we get started. So first, I just want you to take a second and notice how you're feeling right now. Like notice what emotions are in your body. If you're feeling maybe stressed at work, if you're feeling worried about the weather outside, if you're bored right now, kind of wondering what's going to come next. Just notice whatever those emotions are for you. For me, I can feel my heart's racing a little bit and I feel a little bit nervous. So just take notice of whatever those feelings are. And then I want you to also notice what your thoughts are right now. What are you thinking about? What's going through your mind? And just non-judgmentally notice whatever thoughts are coming up for you. And after you've noticed sort of how your emotions are and your thoughts, now I want to come back to our bodies for a second. And so I'm going to have you just, if you can, uncross your legs like I'm doing, but plant your feet flat on the floor and just press your feet into the floor and notice how your feet feel pressed into the floor. And notice if any of your muscles kind of tense when you press, if there's any soreness in your legs. And then just kind of relax your legs and take a deep breath in. And then as you exhale, think about exhaling any tension you might have in your body, just kind of letting that tension out with your breath out. And then one more deep breath in, pulling your diaphragm as far down towards your belly button as you can. And then again, just exhale that tension out. And then I want you to notice how you're feeling now. And if you didn't participate in the exercise, I just want you to notice what came up for you in watching this exercise happening, but choosing not to do it. And then I'm going to go forward and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. So here's kind of the bullet points we're going to run through today. It's a big agenda. Normally, this is something that I would spend a lot of time with patients working on. So excuse me for kind of the brevity of this, but we're going to try to touch on some of the main things that I hope you can take away. So in terms of facing the COVID stressors that we all have, whatever those are, I wanted to run through kind of some of the steps that we can take. And this is all adapted from Russ Harris, and it's the form of acceptance and commitment therapy that's sort of been adapted for COVID times. So what we're going to talk about today is focusing on what's in our control, acknowledging our thoughts and feelings, coming back into our body, engaging in what we're doing very fully, thinking about committed action, what that means for you in your life while you're opening up to whatever sensations and emotions, even if those are difficult for you, while you're aiming towards whatever your values and what's important to you in your life. And then I will, similarly to Dr. Brown, also work on identifying resources, because I also think it's really important that we know what else is out there when crises happen. And then to finish off the acronym, we're going to talk about disinfecting and distancing. So the first part, I think, is a challenging part, but a really important piece, and it's focusing on what's in our control. So whenever you're in a crisis, whatever that is, if that's a pandemic, if that's a financial crisis, or something's going on in your relationships or at work, you know, fear and anxiety to some extent are just kind of inevitable. It's part of natural evolution. It's part of our human normal response to have fear and anxiety whenever there's danger and uncertainty around us. And I think it's really easy to get kind of lost. You know, we can start worrying and ruminating about all kinds of things that we don't have control over. And some of those worries right now might be like, what's going to happen in the future? When am I going to get my vaccine? How is this virus going to affect my community members, my family members? Can I visit my loved ones? How is it affecting my work life? I mean, there's just so many things to worry about right now. And I think that's a completely normal thing. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not always useful or helpful to have those worries and those ruminations. And it can be the fact that, like, the more we focus on what's not in our control, we can become even more anxious and more hopeless and get lost in this cycle of just worrying. So the most useful thing we can really do in a crisis sort of situation is trying to find some way to focus on what we do have control over. And so right now, that might not be like the economy in the world. It might not be our government's response. These are big things that most of us don't really have a lot of control over. And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't have as much control over our emotions and our thoughts as we'd like to. It's really difficult when you feel anxious just to tell yourself, stop feeling anxious, and the anxiety just magically goes away. But the one thing that you do have some control over is your behavior and what you do right now and how you handle the fear and anxiety that you're experiencing. And that's what we're going to really work on talking about today. So I think the important thing to notice is that whatever you do choose to do, it really can make a difference. It can make a difference for yourself. It can make a difference for your family, to your community, to the people around you. And we do have a lot more control of our behavior than sometimes we feel we do, even though our thoughts and feelings sometimes seem like they're out of our control. So the number one thing we can do in a crisis will be to think about what we can have control over and dropping our anchor. And I think when you hear drop the anchor, you're sort of like, what does that mean? Like, you know, what is she talking about, dropping our anchor? What do I actually do? And that's what we're going to kind of go through today. And I think if it helps you to think of like an image with this, you know, when there's a storm going through, like out at sea or on a lake or something, and you're out in a boat, you know, you can't control the weather around you. You're out in a boat out at sea, there's a huge storm, and some of that is out of your control. But if you drop your anchor and just wait for that storm to pass, eventually that storm passes, and then you can focus on where you're going and the direction you want to head, thinking about, while you're dropping the anchor, where you want to be, what's important to you, and not allowing yourself to get swept away in that storm. So the first step we're going to practice today is going to be dropping the anchor. And dropping the anchor is what we started with. It's acknowledging your thoughts and your feelings. So it can be as simple as just telling yourself, I'm noticing anxiety, or here's grief. There's my mind worrying. Sometimes it's really helpful just to say the words out loud, or to think them in your head, like, there goes my mind. And just kindly acknowledging them, even though sometimes it's hard to do when you have frustration and anxiety. It can be hard to be kind to yourself when you're having those sorts of emotions and thoughts. But just noticing when they come up and just naming them, and being aware of what it is that you're experiencing. And this is a really important step that I think a lot of us forget to do, because it's really easy to sometimes try to distract ourselves away from the emotions we're experiencing. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think it's really important that we do take this first step to notice first what's going on in our bodies, in our thoughts and our feelings. And then the next step would be coming back into our body. So that can look at a lot of different ways. You know, sometimes it's really simple, just putting our feet on the floor. You know, when we're in a crisis, when we're feeling anxious, just to be able to plant your feet firmly on the floor and be like, you know what, no matter what's happening around me, no matter how I'm feeling right now, I know that I'm here. My feet are on the floor. I'm stable. Whatever's happening, I can come back to my body and know that things are going to be okay. So sometimes it's really simple like that. Sometimes it can be like pressing your fingertips together. Some people find that to be a really relaxing exercise to do. Stretching can be really nice. I know the previous speaker talks about yoga, and this is definitely where something like yoga can come into play, just being able to notice and be and experiencing in your body. Shrugging your shoulders, doing slow, deep breathing can be helpful. for a lot of people, just taking, even if it's 30 seconds, just to come back in, take some deep breaths, and notice how your body is feeling. And again, the whole point here is we're not trying to distract ourselves from how we're feeling, but it's about being present. And I think that the dangerous part with, if we're just using this as a distraction technique, is then you get so used to distracting yourself from how you feel, then it can be difficult to really notice when you actually feel happy and when you feel joyful and when you feel excited, because you're really used to taking away the emotions from you. And so that's why I think it's so important to notice first how you're feeling, even if it's uncomfortable, and then working on coming back into your body and being present with whatever emotions come up. So again, not distracting yourself here. And then the next step would be engaging in what you're doing. So this can look, again, different ways to different people, but it's refocusing your attention to whatever it is you're doing. And so for the first piece, it can just be some basic mindfulness. This is a version of the 5 senses. So you can do this 5 senses exercise where you notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, or notice 3 things that are touching you, whether that's your shoes or your socks or your sweater you're wearing, and then noticing 2 things you can taste and smell. And this can just help us come back into the present moment. So if things are really chaotic and you're feeling really anxious, you can run through this cycle. And sometimes it's helpful to run through it a couple of times. So acknowledging, again, the cycle would be this ACE cycle, acknowledging how you're feeling, coming back into your body, and then engaging really fully in whatever you're doing. And there's some really cool exercises on this website, and we'll make this available to you afterwards. But these exercises, you can set them for 1 minute, 3 minutes, I think like 7 minutes, 10 minutes. And so someone can walk you through audio, like with audio, so you don't have to try to remember these steps on your own. And it's a really relaxing voice that leads you through this little exercise about coming back into your body. And I always encourage people to practice this when they're not feeling anxious or stressed, and trying to practice it like at the same time every day or a consistent time so that you won't forget to do it. So maybe when you brush your teeth at night, you run through this ACE cycle. Maybe in the morning when you very first wake up, you acknowledge how you're feeling, you come back into your body and you engage in your day and waking up. Maybe it's before you go to bed, you run through this cycle. But I think the more you practice it when you're not anxious or when you're not in crisis, the easier it's going to be for you to use it when you are not feeling as well, when your emotions are a little bit high. So it is something that I think takes some practice to be able to use kind of fluidly throughout your day and throughout your life, really. So again, this is just one more reminder not to skip the acknowledging step, because I know that's something we all want to do, because it can be really difficult to just use these audio things and to use these different coping things as just a form of distraction rather than thinking about how we're feeling. But I think, it's really important to be present with the uncomfortable feelings. And the more you are able to do this anchor step, the more you have control over what you do. That's the beautiful part of this, is that you can feel anxious, you can feel frustrated and upset, but you can still have control over your actions and what you do and where you want to go in your life. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So committed action. Committed action, the definition of it is the action you take because it's important to you, even if it brings up difficult thoughts and feelings. So for committed action, I think it's important to ask yourself, like, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of caring, supportive actions do you want to take in your life? So for a lot of people, that means caring for others. And I think a lot of us are probably here because we do care for others that sometimes have a difficult time. But it's important to also do these things for yourself before you can do them for other people. For some people right now, physical exercise is especially important, just to get outside a little bit as much as you can. Cooking, whatever meaningful activities you can do with other people at this point that are still safe. And then just asking yourself, what can I do right now in my life, even if it's really small, to improve my life or improve the lives of others? And then this is all about doing that piece and engaging fully in it. So just being very present in whatever you choose to do. So you're not distracted thinking about a lot of other things. You're really engaging in what you're choosing to do at this moment. And that, I think, is what gives us the control over, this is the piece of taking control over what we actually have control over that can help us be grounded. And then while we're doing this, we're opening up ourselves to make room for difficult feelings, being kind to ourselves, and then acknowledging that fear, anxiety, anger, any of these emotions, confusion, it's all normal responses to a pandemic. It's normal responses to stress. It's really how our human bodies have survived evolution, by being fearful and able to mount a sympathetic response to get away from the lion, So these are all things that we really expect to happen to us when we're under stress. And that's the piece here, is not trying to stop them, but being opening up to them and making room for them and trying to treat ourselves kindly. And I think that is a key piece, is that the self-kindness piece for yourself is really important, so that you can take care of others as well as yourself. And I think one phrase that can be really helpful to me is to ask myself, if someone I loved was going through what I'm going through right now, or if someone I loved felt like I felt right now, what would I say to them? What would I do for them? How would I treat them? What kind of space, grace, kindness, what would I want to give to them? And how would I want them to feel and take care of themselves? And then trying to practice that for yourself. Because I think most of us tend to be, I think, especially as Midwesterners and Iowans, really giving and really willing to do for others, but not always as willing to do for ourselves. So sometimes it can be helpful to ask yourself how you would want others to be treated in that situation, and then really doing that for yourself and then doing it for others too. And then the committed action piece should be guided by your core values. So underlying all of this is thinking about what kind of person are you? What do you want to stand for? How do you want to treat yourself? How do you want to treat others? One exercise that I think is really fun to do, and we do in group therapy settings a lot, is this idea of a 90th birthday party. And so it's to say, when I'm 90 years old and I have everybody sitting around in a room at the Grafton Community Center and we're all celebrating my 90th birthday, what do I want to hear people say? What kinds of things do I hope that they reflect back and say, this is the kind of person she was, this is the kind of stuff she did during her life. And then thinking about what that is, what kind of values you want other people to see in you, and living your life like that every day, in every action you take, in the ways you approach others, in the ways you approach yourself. Because really it starts in every moment is our opportunity to live our life with values. And so by dropping this anchor, grounding ourselves, and then thinking about our values, it gives us that opportunity to work towards really the kind of person we want to be and the kind of legacy we want to leave, I suppose. So kind of last, we're going to look at these resources. I think the previous resources given are excellent. Your Life Iowa is just another crisis support line. I think just always being aware of what is out there to help others. Just, you never know when you're going to run across a coworker or a kid or a family member, neighbor, whomever that might need some of this information. And so I think the more all of us can be equipped to be able to help others with this kind of information, it just helps the population. And then the books, if you are interested in this kind of work, this acceptance and commitment therapy stuff, which I really think is helpful, a really great book that's easy reading is called The Happiness Trap, and it gives you all kinds of exercises and ways to think about practicing this in your daily life. And then another book is called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, and it's a workbook you can work through that it kind of really delves into this. And then again, that's the website on the bottom that has the free audio recordings to guide you through some of these things. And then last but not least, disinfecting and physically distancing. And I think remembering that even though sometimes we're really distant from each other physically right now, and that can be really hard, there's thankfully so many ways like this that we can remain socially connected with each other, and trying to take advantage of as many opportunities as you can to connect with others in whatever way you can still do so safely. And so just to kind of wrap through everything, I know this is a really quick introduction, but this is be the big takeaways that if you can practice, starting today in your life, can really make a big difference for people. So again, it's focusing on what's in your control, dropping that anchor, and then acknowledging while you drop the anchor, it's acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, coming back into your body, engaging in whatever you're doing right now in a very fully committed way, using committed action. And that committed action is driven by your underlying values and things that are important to you. And that's all done while you're opening yourself up to experiencing whatever feelings come up for you. So whether that's discomfort, fear, frustration, you're still working to live your life in that value-driven direction, even though it can be difficult sometimes. And then just knowing what resources are available for yourself and for others while you're keeping distant and disinfecting. So that's all I had today. I'm happy to answer any questions and go over any of these if anyone has anything else that they are wondering about still.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to share one question in the chat, which is, I always try to monitor my thoughts and feelings, but there is a difficulty in defining these feelings and thoughts in a clear way. Is there an effective way to help define these feelings exactly?
That's a really great question. And that can be really hard. I think, especially for a lot of us that kind of grew up with this, just, get it done sort of idea that we all have in the Midwest that, no matter what we're experiencing, we're going to just kind of go and do whatever. A lot of us aren't maybe as in tune with what those emotions are. One of the things that can be helpful, there's feeling wheels. I'll see in the next few minutes if I can find one and drop the link in the chat. But there's basically this wheel that kind of branches out to different words of emotions. And so sometimes I'll encourage people to keep those feeling wheels with them, so that if they want to just try to take notes and see how they're feeling, they can look through and scan through words and sort of see what resonates with them. Sometimes the word you use is maybe not as important as just recognizing how you're feeling. So even if maybe you aren't ready to put the word frustration, anger, anxiety, and necessarily classify it, just noticing how your body feels and what your emotions like what the response is coming up for you rather than focusing so much on the word. I think putting words on it can be helpful, but if you feel like you're getting stuck on it, I wouldn't let yourself get too hung up on this specific word. But I will look for a feelings wheel just to give you some ideas of what that might look like.
Thank you. If anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and drop them.
I've got a question for Shea there, and that is, Shea, you know, there's been a lot of, every night in the news, like, matter of fact, most news stations, as they introduce their newscast for the night, they say, this is your #1 coronavirus news station and coverage. And so I'm just wondering, is there such a thing as maybe listening to too much or studying and focusing on the COVID-19 problem more than you should? Or, I know you want to stay knowledgeable, you want to stay in touch, what's going to help you health-wise, you know, but is there too much that could be focused on? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's so hard when there's so much, like you said, and so much is changing all the time. I think what we often tell people, and what I do myself, is just only allowing yourself so much time. For a lot of people, that's like just 10 or 20 minutes, finding the news source you trust, and can sometimes read through quickly or watch quickly just to hit the highlights, and then really not letting yourself get too overwhelmed and wrapped up in it. And then again, trying to find the other things in your life that are important to you, because I think if we just sit there all day, I mean, I already feel anxious just like going through work every day, getting screened and the temperature check and having to answer questions. It's always so prominent in your mind. Like, how am I doing? Do I have any symptoms? Does the person I'm sitting next to have a cough? And then I think if we just see that on the news, you know, all night long, I think it's only going to drive that anxiety. So I think if it's possible to limit that news piece as much as you can, just to still get what you need to know, like the basic information, but then move forward and do something else that's important, like go on a date with your spouse, you know, something that you enjoy.
Kind of follow David's suggestion there, maybe, huh? Watching those movies together. But I think stay informed is probably important, but yet don't get too saturated. Don't let yourself get too saturated is what I'm hearing. So thank you. Okay, good job, by the way. And I think we're going to move on to Dr. Larry Tranel next here then. And we've got Larry kind of down to cover some excellent topics here. He's going to do mindset tactics for brain and behavioral health. And I should mention that Larry's also been a dairy science specialist with us for quite a few years. He's really focused on helping a lot of the agriculture community kind of cope with the different stresses and challenges they have. And with agriculture and farming, there's a lot of things there that happen year after year. This last year being no exception with the drought we had to kind of deal with, and also derecho problems, and I'd say big swings in our livestock and crop prices. And so farmers are really under a lot of stressful things. So that's typically what Larry talks about. And he's done an excellent job. We've had him on programs before. And so I'm going to let Larry just give you some ideas on some of his mental health, behavioral things that he can kind of give us some good ways to keep yourself mentally fit. So go ahead, Larry.
All right, appreciate that, Dennis. So yeah, we're going to talk, and I can talk in a general sense. We can talk in agriculture, a lot of different ways we can deal with this. But if you're a human being, I think it deals with you quite well on all these mindset tactics, and whether we call it mental health or brain health, behavioral health, they all kind of feed into each other. But I think one of the bigger distinctions is to take a look at stress versus distress. And I think as we start taking a look at this, when we talk about the word stress, it seems like a lot of people have this very negative connotation in their mind about what stress really is, that we want to really try to wrap our heads around or wrap our arms around. So when we take a look at the word stress, it's spelled exactly the opposite of the word desserts. Okay, so I'm not encouraging the added sugars and the junk carbs that are actually in this dessert, but I want us to take a look at just a picture of how we look at it negatively versus a more positive way to look at it. Because a lot of times the things that stress us in life, you know, later on in life, you start thinking, well, that was quite a blessing to us. Or we think of this thing as a curse, and we understand there's a very positive impact in our lives because of this maybe not so good thing that actually happened. So how do we start taking a look at something that's more positive, and maybe think about these stresses? Sometimes they may be a backwards blessing to us. So when we take a look at life in general, we realize that life is full of chaos, okay? And I think as the compassionate Buddha, get a little philosophical here, one of the first premises from the compassionate Buddha is that life is difficult. And I think when we take a look at mindset tactics, okay, we take a look at the reality that life is difficult. And once that becomes our reality, then other things might not seem quite so difficult with us. Because we tend to take a look at maybe life that needs to be a stress-free life, a fat-free life, illness-free, money-free, grief-free. So we always want this easy life, and the easy life that people that kind of take that mindset, okay, tend to have more difficulties, I would tend to say, from my experience in working with them. So we have chaos in our relationships. We have chaos in money, time, and different types of things that happen to us in our life. But our goal is to try to order this chaos and try to reduce the stress as best we can to make it more order till we can move on with our lives, because the goal is undoubtedly to put life in order. So how do we do that? There's a lot of different philosophies around the world or whatever, but I think one is to overcome those crosses that we bear in our lives, and how do we grow our lives to more meaning? So in some thought processes from some psychologists will tend to say that overcoming difficulty is a process of stretching and thinning our ego boundaries to become more, to do more with our life and have life as more meaning. So I think one of the biggest mindset tactics we can actually take a look at is to realize that, yes, life is difficult. It's an acknowledgement, it's a reality. Okay, let's move beyond it. So another one, when we take a look at all this chaos, is how do we simply do things? And here I say, just keep your room clean. Okay, so simple things day after day to take one thing in our life. It might be a simple thing as cleaning our room, or just cleaning one thing in our room to try to move ourselves more towards an ordered life. And the third thing I would say there is, instead of to make all these to-do lists, which I think are pretty important for us to order our lives, make a to-be list. And I think that's kind of what Shea was working with as we take a look at where do you want to be when you're 90 years old? What is that future to-be list that you want to be? I think research bears on quite strongly that that's a very important mindset tactic for people to have a happier life and a more meaningful life. So how we think of stress is often, when we take a look at, I'm going to move something here on my thing so I can see. So how we think of stress and how we handle stress is often more important than the stress itself. So a 30,000 person study, there's a 43% increase in dying from stress. But let's look into that study a little bit. When we take a look at, my slides aren't moving. Okay, but that's only for those people that reported being under stress and also at the same time thinking that stress was bad. Okay, for those that under stress who didn't think stress was bad, there wasn't a difference in it. So I think that's an important piece that we take a look at. That simply believing that stress is bad can increase the risk of death. So my concern, and especially with the farmers that I work with, we're doing so much in mental health and it's being advertised. A lot of farmers that aren't stressed out, they're thinking, well, maybe I should be under more stress because everybody's telling me that. So we think all stress is bad, maybe because that's what we tell them. And sometimes this attention to the negativity of stress might also increase our emotionality to the stress, which might actually cause more stress in us. Okay, so again, I think it's important for us to think about what is stress and what is it in our lives. So those who think that stress is bad tend to have increased heart rate and also blood vessel constriction, which is not a good thing. Okay, those that think stress is good, they still have the increased heart rate, but the blood vessels stay relaxed, just as in the same as experiencing joy and courage from Kelly Guggenheim in Stanford University. So acknowledging stress as good is good. Distress is not so good, and that's where we need to delineate the difference. So let's keep our minds and our bodies from going there. So the tale of two minds, Dr. David alluded to this a little bit. So we have this protective mind. And the sad thing is that so many people spend so much of their life in this protective mind versus getting it into higher reasoning. So they spend their life a lot more just dealing with all the chaos, and they can't get away from it because they can't get into that higher reasoning. So that protective mind, fight or flight. When stress comes to you, what you're going to do. So when we take a look at the mind that wins in our lives, dealing with stress or dealing with whatever tends to be the mind that we feed. So that primitive mind, it magnifies the risk in our lives. We get ourselves in this protective mode, which we increase our hesitation, sometimes our guilt that we feel about not being able to do this, the shame, the fear, the impulses, very a short-term mind. And all these protective emotions are often exhibited negatively in our lives and in our emotions and our behaviors. The prefrontal cortex, what's happening there when we're in this primitive mind? Okay, so higher reasoning tends to be cut off because they cut off all unnecessary function when we're in this fight or flight type mode. And so when we take a look at trying to move ourselves, it definitely is a tale of two brains. Okay, so we literally need to have this discussion about what these two brains are. So the mental versus the physical risk. So there's this instinct, and this mind's been with us for millions and millions of years. Okay, we go into protective mode, and it is an instinct. Okay, we focus overwhelmingly on the risk, and in addition to that, we become overwhelmed to the point that maybe we can't even make decisions just because we're so overwhelmed by the risk that's right in front of us that we can't think 2 streets down the road of what we need to do there. So we refrain from higher purpose reasoning, as I mentioned, and I think one of the worst ones is that we often self-defeat our own good behaviors just because we're stuck in that mode. So we avoid possible pain much more than seeking gain. Research will actually show that we are in protective mode because we don't like pain. Even though there's a lot of gain on the other side of the fence, we won't go there because we're going to protect ourselves against this pain. So how do we use the best of both minds and just realize that there's kind of this internal conflict? Yeah, we, in a sense, we want to try to take this person, get away from there, get more to the prefrontal cortex. But again, our protective mind is extremely strong, holding us back. So one of the thoughts is, how do we hack or hijack or sometimes try to trick our minds to better deal with the stresses that are that come to us in our lives? So I'm having a problem getting my slides turned on. That's not good. Okay, so for some reason, my slides are not advancing. Okay, so, but as we take a look at this slide here, there is a couple things that did come up here. When we take a look at trying to use the best of both worlds, the numbers 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 came up. And then, so one of the things that take a look at when we get ourselves in this mindset that we get stuck, okay, can we take, say, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, something that's not natural to us, that actually makes us think. And that one's not as hard as the ZYXWV for me. And so I'll try to use that when I get stuck in something to try to, and under pressure, to try to get the prefrontal cortex working and get my thought process working a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop sharing and actually reshare because I can't, I'm not able to move my screen here. So bear with me for a second. Okay, so this slide here goes with our human function curve. Okay, so there's the reality of stresses. And when we take a look at stresses being good, I think there's a lot of good because it causes this arousal stress that actually increases our performance to a certain point here. We all have our comfort zone of where this good stress is and where the bad stress starts. We realize that our performance can actually go beyond our comfort zone, but we might have some issues with that. Once we start getting into this phase of distress, that's where trauma and exhaustion, ill health, and maybe that breakdown that would actually happen in our lives. So think of stress kind of as a rubber band. Early on, it's actually some very good stress that causes some tension and actually kind of stretches us and teaches us to grow a little bit. But it gets too much, we start seeing the strainage and the breakage and the point to where it can actually snap in us. But I think that's a good analogy just of what stress actually is. When we take a look at the comfort zone there, we think about resiliency, is that we can actually stretch our comfort zone towards handling stress by actually some learned behaviors. And those are some of the mindset tactics that I want to try to go through. So our human function curve, we undoubtedly want to think outside the box. We're always told we got to think outside the box. But there's some issues here. When we go beyond our comfort zone, that is not at one's highest performance level. Yeah, we can push it beyond for higher performance, but the cost of doing that is often living beyond the margins. And to think about our lives today compared to maybe the 1950s, the margins of time, the margins of energy, the margins of focus, just because of all the busyness, all the technology, all the things we got to do in this life, okay, they really impact our brain health, they impact our relationships, our self-care, and our behavioral health as well. So we need to operate, when we talk about stress, inside that comfort box within the margins. So we realize that there's a neuron code. We can change our thought. That's going to change the code. We can actually change our emotions by kind of hacking it. So the different types of emotions exhibit different pieces of the brain as we take a look at things. But the big key here is this word reinterpretation. It should be one of the biggest words because we need to reinterpret a lot of things. So families who reinterpret initial negative situations, the more positive meanings, are more likely to be in control of their stressors, okay, increasing that resiliency, find possible solutions to the crisis situations, no matter how bad they are, and also adapt well eventually to the crisis as they go through that, maybe that, even that grieving process, to return to some more meaningful life afterwards. So when we take a look at the damage of negative facial expressions to brain health, okay, that defensive brain that's at work, it is working in our brains as well. It's not just what's on our face, it's what's on our mind as well. So one of those is disgust, okay? So what happens when we have this hormone or this facial expression of disgust? The hormone cortisol, that stress hormone, gets released. And if we get way too much stress or cortisol hormone released in our brains, it can shorten our brain receptors over time, nerve endings. It can just actually do some damage to our brain physically, not just mentally. So we have that attitude towards the source of that disgust, and not saying all disgust isn't warranted, but when we start doing it, having this disgust look just because somebody said something to us, even though they have some good intention or just didn't sit quite right, that's where the concern tends to be. We also tend to have distrust, and maybe from a farmer perspective here, we don't trust the markets or the farm system, or we might not trust people within our lives, our spouse, kids, or we just don't trust them to do the right thing, or we always think that they have a malintent or something like that. That can actually, in fact, impact our brains as well. So the other one, and this is a big one because there's so much research on the facial expression of smiling, and yet so many people walk around this life with their frowns on their faces, okay? So it actually creates different brain waves. There's more difficulty planning, trying to communicate with people when you have a frown on your face, and it actually gets in your decision-making ability as well. So I tend to say that the way that we face stress can help us better face stress. And I think it's a pretty important piece. So we think about just the concept of smiling, to be like a proton, be positive, and be smile, because the research on smiling is huge. So I've got a little, what I call a BS minute about breathe and smile. You don't have to do this, but I'm just gonna run through. This is what I do. I try to do at least twice a day. It works extremely well for me. So you lay, recline, sit, stand, whatever position you're at, try to relax yourself, try to relax your facial muscles. Eyes open or closed, maybe picture something that's positive to you in your life. Breathe in slowly, and I want you to fake smile as you do. So take a look at these deep breaths, fake smiling as you do, both in and out. So we're gonna breathe out as well, and then fake smiling to the bottom. And then when you get to the bottom, I want you to chuckle and actually do a fake laugh at the bottom of the breath. And I want you to repeat that, breathing deeper and smiling wider every time you breathe in and breathe out, and try to do that for a minute. So when we take a look at smiling and laughter, it has a mimic reaction or reflection. So it's contagious to other people, but it also stays with you, which I think is the important part. So this BS minute, breathe and smile. After doing so, I've tested this on quite a few people. They tend to report this, feeling more relaxed and less stressed. Smiling continued shortly afterwards, and sometimes it continues actually throughout the day. Having more energy and enthusiasm afterwards. That frowning is actually more difficulty. So think what that's going to do to your brain if frowning becomes more difficult for you because you have this habit of smiling. So I say if that didn't happen for you, do the exercise again and focus on that and see if it's more difficult to frown. And then the last one is just facial disgust. Again, because that's one expression I think we need to get off a lot of our faces for simple things that happen in our lives. And again, if we don't do that, let's try to do the exercise again. But the bottom line is overall, the well-being has increased. So the BS minute, I say it's anything but BS. It increases the serotonin in our bodies. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, which not many people talk about, is that standing tall, whether you're tall or short, is posturing for success, because there is a neurochemistry happening within our bodies of victory and defeat, success or failure. And we can either be self-promoting or we can be self-defeating. And sadly, a lot of people choose to self-defeat themselves simply by how they posture themselves and their reaction to that. So just like smiling increases serotonin, just looking up and standing tall with posture, with shoulders back, it increases our serotonin levels within our body. And it drops when you feel defeated, when you put your head down, you feel threatened and just anxious, weak, or whatever. So there's an important piece to that. Okay, it's more than just, it really does good work with it. So I tend to say that if you truly want to lower your attitude and you want to lower your social status in life, then all you need to do is lower your posture. It will happen automatically for you. So the opposite is true as well. So there's also this research on this 2-minute power pose, or think of the Incredible Hulk making that big run. Okay, so it'll show that it'll increase serotonin, testosterone. It will decrease that stress hormone of cortisol as well. So you don't have to even do it for 2 minutes. Sometimes I might just do it for 5-10 seconds or whatever, and I can feel the difference. So taking care of yourself for your prospective situation in life, because we realize that some people, and it's not just farmers, they take better care of their pets, their crops, their livestock than they care for themselves. So sometimes we might be our own worst employee trying to help ourselves, or our own worst boss telling ourselves what to do. Okay, so I think taking care of ourselves is a pretty important piece. Some people wallow in self-pity even when things are good. Why they do it, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's because they're caught in that primitive brain. Some people treat others with more respect than themselves. Okay, so victory, defeat, and it's kind of a social order type thing. Why do we do that? Some people amplify their suffering and they amplify their stress for attention, or just by branding it as an injustice, whether it be on unfair markets, society respect, this, that, or the other thing, okay? Some people refuse to strive to improve, okay? So they're actually addicted to chaos and they kind of keep themselves in that mindset. But I think one of the premises we take is that neutral is not good, okay? As human beings, we need to be progressing and moving on. So don't be these some people, because these some people are not happy no matter what they do. And I realize there's other issues in the way of disorders, addictions, and things like that that can be going on. And we need to rise above those. But as we take a look at it, let's try not to be these some people. So in order to improve, one must have some desire. Okay, we can't give up hope. We need to sometimes admit that there's a problem before we actually take action on it, and taking responsibility for one's life or for the problem, act accordingly. And I say that with the thought process that if we're in stress, we can try to do that. If we are beyond it into distress, it's very difficult sometimes for us to act upon different types of things, because we're just kind of immobilized. We just can't think, we can't act, we can't do this because there's just so much stress going on. We just don't know what to do. So sometimes that's when we need professionals to help, or a good friend or family or a counselor or pastor or whatever to help to actually move us from stage 1 to stage 2 and get help if needed. And again, sometimes if they're in high levels of distress, it's not that we're just encouraging them to get help. We might have to get help for them. Okay, so the bottom line is, how do you help them be proactive, not so passive with the things that happen to them in their life? So again, neutral is not associated with personal growth or happiness. We need to keep moving, keep our head above water. We might have to work just as hard just to maintain the same level of success. Okay, but even just keeping that, one's life or one's finances above water, that is a positive thing. So we also realize that brain health is tied to the heart. Okay, so oxytocin, we call that a bonding hormone. As a dairy farmers, we know that as a milk letdown hormone. Okay, it fine-tunes close relationships. It helps the cows let milk down, happens in humans as well. And just all those things about empathy and support, things that people care about. In Belgium, we have a picture of some cows when I was there, and just this family that actually rented out their cows, that people could actually lay with these cows in the pasture and trying to increase their oxytocin and try to increase their bond with them, because they said it makes them feel happier, and science would actually bear that out. So it's also a stress hormone that people don't realize. It's tied to the heart. And when under stress, it actually motivates them to seek support, people that care within their lives. So on the flip side of that, if we don't have that social support, UK research will say that loneliness equates to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Okay, so when you take a look at dying early in life, okay, it's just one thing loneliness actually perpetrates that. So it protects the body. Oxytocin strengthens, repairs the heart. So those feelings of closer just enables more oxytocin to be released. So it's actually a stress response that also has a resiliency component, which I think is important as well. So oxytocin can undoubtedly put us in a better mood if you're coming from the dairy industry or wherever. So here's a happiness tip based on some research I just heard about last week, that if you do something for others, okay, you get some pretty positive gain. If you do something for the planet, you get a little gain, but not near as much as doing stuff for others. Okay, a lot of times we focus, well, if I'm under a lot of stress, I need to do something for myself. Okay, for self, the research bared out that there really wasn't much benefit doing that. Okay, so take that with a grain of salt, because we do need to take care of ourselves, no doubt. But again, doing things for others tends to have a lot bigger benefit than most people actually realize. So brain health is tied to routine. especially for distressed people that are feeling anxiety and depression, because we can't even easily treat that if they have unpredictable daily routines, because there's so much tied to just those daily cycles, the biological rhythms that we have within our bodies and in our minds. So start your day with a routine and schedule that routine, because we know that's important. Okay, the times you get up in the morning, the routines that you have to start the day and actually go throughout the day. We don't want every day to be the same, because we're going to lose some excitement, but there's definitely some routine to be had there. So when we take a look at breakfast, and this is coming from Dr. Jordan Peterson, just to eat a protein and fat breakfast when you get up, because this insulin spike, we are in a sugar addicted society, and these insulin spikes really cause people to not have healthy mindsets. So don't eat simple carbs and simple sugars for breakfast, digest it too fast, producing this blood sugar spike, then a dip, causing one to become hypoglycemic, psychologically unstable all day. And the only way you can reset that is to get back to sleep. So we realize brain health is tied to gut health as well. It's heavily impacted by diet. People don't realize that the serotonin is 95% secreted by the gut, only 5% from the brain. And that is our happiness hormone. So we need to take care of our stomachs. So one thing, especially in what we've been going through here, turn off the news while you're eating, because we realize that mild stress can really tip the microbial balance in our guts and just give us a negative nervous system feedback as well. So gut feeling, 100 million neurons, 100 trillion microbes in the gut. There is a lot of stuff going on in our stomachs, and it goes both ways. So it feeds back to the brain and it feeds to the gut, and they cooperate with each other quite well. So that gut feeling is important. Those diet, as Dr. David mentioned, that diet is extremely important as well. So added sugars and processed carbs. I'm a person that used to think I suffered from a lot of anxiety, and I didn't realize it probably till about a month ago that I suffered from a sugar addiction that caused my anxiety. So the sugar that we eat in 7 hours is what a person in 1822 ate in 5 days. So 3-4 times too much sugar going into a lot of our bodies. So sugar is addictive. The brain releases the dopamine, creating even more receptors that crave it even more. It's just more and more of an addiction. Okay, so when we spike these insulin levels, it inflames the brain, gives us lower levels of nervous tissue growth. It blocks the usage of fat storing cells. And that's one of the things I noticed, is that I started losing a lot more weight when I got rid of the sugar addiction. It wasn't a fat issue. It was actually a sugar issue. So we take a look at how insulin converts the sugar into fat, but it doesn't let the body use it. Okay, so the key is lowering the sugar. And so sugar is good for us, but it's all that added sugar and it's all that processed carbs that quickly turns to sugar that is a problem. So leptin is another one, protein hormone that gives a signal for satiety, which is that feeling of being full that gets suppressed. And so one blindly eats more without feeling full. And so one is often blind to the robber until we're robbed blind, and that's a fat truth. Okay. We also have the stress, and that causes high cortisol release, causes another craving for these junk foods, these pleasurable type foods. And when we take a look at less sleep, as Dr. David mentioned that as well, we can't say enough about people that don't get enough sleep. They have less serotonin. They also have these issues with these cravings and things like that. Their lives just don't become quite as healthy. So one is often blind to the robber until one's robbed blind, and it's a sugary truth as well. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is these smartphones. Okay, so the natural brain biorhythms are redirected by smartphone usage and focus. So dopamine rewards users every time you have a like, you have a post, you have this nice search, it becomes addictive. Okay, so it can be as addictive as gambling with the slot machine, all this excessive stimulation, increased emotionality, and decreased real social interaction. And it can actually move people into distress with all these constant interruptions, all these notifications. Drive me nuts at home with all these phones going off all the time. It was bad enough with telemarketers and things way back when. But just how do you take a look at all these unending searches and both the real and the false spectacles that are happening in life? Because the average brain is now being interrupted every 6 to 12 minutes. And people have a hard time even 10 minutes going without their phones. We know this is an addiction. So again, we're blind to the robber. It's a smartphone truth as well. Those that are constantly connected are more stressed. They feel lonelier, more likely to experience depression and a sleep disorder. And they actually can increase envy and depression for people that regularly use it. Reduce performance, and there's some ways it increases our performance without a doubt in our jobs, but it can actually reduce performance, social interaction, sleep, mental health, and increase anxiety, depression, envy, and some other things as well. So how do you get this dopamine response? And so you need this, you need this, you need this, and more of it each time. It can actually end up, when you don't get it, into a negative emotion, a negative reality, more anxiety, depression. Okay, so I tend to say, don't let family relationships hide behind the screens. They might need a digital detox, which when we take a look at disabling notifications, taking time off from it, out of sight, out of mind, especially at night, because of that blue light that inhibits the melatonin production, which is kind of a sleep hormone that goes into both quality and quality of sleep. And then we take a look at just make sure that these phones are secondary to relationships and this face-to-face interaction, which is more difficult with COVID, but it's a pretty important piece of our mental well-being as well. So when we take a look at being bored, it is more important than checking this phone every 5 minutes, because one of the things we see in child research is that kids don't have enough time to be bored. And I think it's we go for the same for adults as well, because when you take a look at that whole concept of being bored, it really bears into our creativity and our lack thereof if we don't get the chance to be bored. So even as adults, allow yourself to be bored, because sometimes that's when you do your best thinking. So be mindful of the present, breathe, smile, stand tall, take care and have respect for yourself, be proactive and responsible for yourself and life. Realize that life's value goes beyond the farm, beyond your jobs, beyond this moment that just happened. Leave the pity parties to attend to higher virtues and use that higher reasoning brain. Swap the processed carbs and added sugars out of your diet. Don't let screen time deplete your dream time, your time to be bored and think and be creative, and realize that generosity and gratitude really increase those happiness hormones. So I know that was in a nutshell. I apologize for the technology issues that I had there, but again, mindset tactics for brain health, behavioral well-being, they're there. There's a lot of things we can do to try to improve that. So I'll leave it there if anybody has any questions or comments.
So we got one question just jumped up in the chat. What about caffeine? Is it good or bad, or what?
I'm not really up on a lot of the research on caffeine, but I think I would actually say that it's both good and bad, depending if it's going to keep you awake at night. And I think a lot of these things with psychology, there are a lot of common sense type stuff as well. So, I mean, if it's going to keep you up at night, I would say it's not good, but I think there's actually some research or caffeine and some chocolate even is actually good for the mind and body with it. So I would just say, make sure it's in moderation. And I think that goes with a lot of things in life, that they're really not either good or bad, but it's what's done in moderation and how do we balance our lives with them. So I don't have a detailed answer with a lot of research on that one, but that's what I would say common sense wise.
So you shared a lot with us. Really appreciate that. Any follow-up resources you'd recommend?
Well, we do have a farm stress resource guide that we put together about 2 years ago, and we're coming out with another one that actually deals with some of these same topics that we're talking about with brain health and behavioral well-being. They're kind of still being reviewed and worked through. So I think Dr. David and Dr. Shea, they both shared a lot of those resources. So the resources that I would tend to have, I think, are actually some of the same ones that they would have.
You know, Larry, you talked about that loneliness could be as bad as having several cigarettes a day and smoking. And so I'm just kind of wondering, now, latest thing I heard just lately on the news that night is that the entertainment business, where people can go out and socialize and enjoy themselves, whether it be going to a movie or a play or some kind of musical production or sporting event, those things aren't happening. So I know David did talk a little bit about he and his wife doing movies at home. But any other thoughts you have as far as how people can avoid that loneliness, and especially if somebody that actually literally is living at home alone? How can those folks get out and maybe do a little socializing, realizing the social distancing and realizing you need to stay safe with masks and entertainment and socializing are a little restricted? But any suggestions there, Larry, at all?
Yeah, I think I'll probably talk out of both sides of my mouth on that, because one of the things about the social distancing and not being able to get out, so how nice is it to be able to talk to people, even though it's not really face-to-face, but it's still, we can FaceTime and talk to them and kind of attend sessions like this. And so I think it's important for us to do that. I think when we take a look at another piece about the digital, is just the cell phone usage. It's just that when you take a look at all the communication, especially for young people nowadays, the way it's all text. Okay, so their communication skills tend not to be quite as good. So anytime that we aren't able to communicate face-to-face or have the confidence to pick up the phone and actually talk to them and verbalize different types of things, and realize a lot of our communication, about 65 to 70%, is probably nonverbal depending on the conversation. So anything we can do to try to stay connected, yeah, it might be Instagram, it might be a lot of these social types of things. But again, I think again, everything is in balance, that we need those things to kind of get a certain amount. But if we get too much of it, it's the emotionality that increases in people's minds that then increases the anxiety and can actually lead to depression for a lot.
Okay, I know you're a lay pastor, lay minister. How can you kind of maybe, how would church get involved in this situation as far as your religion and some of those things? Go ahead.
Well, I think when Dr. David again put on that spirituality and prayer, and you know, people have this mindset that you need to separate church and state. Okay, so it's freedom of religion, not from religion. And I think it's important that there's a lot of good research out there that people that have a larger why in life, okay, they will figure out how to manage through these things or whatever. So that does have kind of a religious component. When you take a look at life being difficult, the crosses that we bear in life, and that kind of has a spirituality component too, because when you take a look at different religions and I think the hard part is that when we get stuck, so let's just pick on Christianity a little bit. There's so much, when you take a look at, you know, the focus of the cross and all those things that we have to bear in our lives. Okay, but what about the resurrection? And there's a big psychology in regards to that, of overcoming these difficulties in our life, to stretch and thin our ego boundaries to become more of who we are and more intertwined with other people's lives. So if we stay focused on this primitive brain, stay focused on the cross, stay focused on the difficulty and all the chaos, because again, people can be addicted to chaos, okay? And they have a very hard time actually moving their life into that next stage, which is trying to order things to overcome and to higher focus. And so that's why I really like, you know, sometimes when I do these presentations, I'll show, and it's kind of funny that Dr. Shea said, what do you like is going to be at 90. So I show this picture of this really old guy dancing. And I said, that is me dancing at my grandkids' wedding. Okay, but that's the picture that I have. So I need to take care of myself physically and mentally so I can still walk by the time. So I'm going to have a darn good posture from here till I'm 90, because I know what that does to my mental health. In fact, I ref basketball. And so one night, and this has been about 2 months ago, one of the refs said, when they're during the timeouts, you're supposed to, look like a stud out there. Don't have your head down and droop down and just hold the ball in front of you. So now I take that basketball and I actually hold it way up here, chest back and things like that. And it's just amazing how much more confidence that gives me actually calling the game. Okay, so we can take a look at posture and smiling and all those things that I just ran through with you, and say that they're simple and maybe they don't mean a whole lot, but I wouldn't be telling you if these wouldn't be having a heavy impact in my own life, or people that I'm working with, that I can see that they're actually having a pretty good impact in their life.
Some good ideas there. I think there's a suggestion in the chat that maybe Eric wants to share that. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so I'm going to share, there are struggles in all lives. Is the correct way to deal with things to accept them as they are, or to deal with them? Or there are doubts about this theory that it is weakness and evasion from reality. Is this idea considered negative, that life is not easy?
So did David or Shea or Larry want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Anybody?
I'll give the other two first chance since I've talked a lot.
Sure. So I think it's a complicated question, and I think there's different theories in psychotherapy that would answer this differently. In terms of acceptance and commitment therapy, the focus would be understanding how you're feeling and accepting that, and then moving forward despite having negative feelings, still moving in the value direction. There's other frames of therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy that's more focused on challenging the thoughts and feelings that you're having, which is a little bit different than what I'm talking about. So I think it sort of depends on what fits you and your personal life better, and kind of how you view things. But I do think there's a few different ways to look at things. It's not necessarily one way or the other.
Anything else to add to that, you guys?
I guess I would say when you take a look at negative feelings, we harp on these actually quite a bit, but negative feelings are not bad. Okay, they are there for a reason. They're there to teach us, they're there to protect us and things like that. So those negative feelings are actually a positive thing. but it's how we deal with those. And when we get stuck in not being able to overcome those negative feelings and we wallow in the negative mindsets and the negative facial expressions and all that negativity because of those negative feelings. So it's kind of a process we need to think a little bit more and think those through. And I think it's more important for us to, especially when you're working with kids, is that, people always want to sympathize with kids. We don't want to hurt their feelings. I really don't carry that premise very much at all. I'm more worried about how kids think than how they feel. And I think if you teach them how to think properly, we can teach them how to think about their feelings in a more healthy way.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, as a therapist, some of the tools I've often used is what we call reframing or normalizing, because a lot of times folks will come in, my office and maybe talk about things and they're really stressed about them. And I think what I would be consistent with Larry saying is, I would normalize and say, yeah, that's an issue, but it's fairly normal issue for a lot of different people. And or reframe it in such a way that it doesn't seem as quite as big a problem as it really is. And so, it's how we language and talk about problems that sometimes impacts their ability to manage them as well.
There might be one more comment in the chat.
Yeah, I can jump in. And someone's just sharing that she's been very concerned about a good friend having a breakdown with being used at her job, and now she has some more ideas to help her. And she's hoping that we make this available to others. I think all of you said it was all right to share this video. I think we'll probably put it up for a limited amount of time, maybe a month or two. I'll have the link up there. And so if you guys could share your presentations and any other resources, we'll send that out. Probably tomorrow we'll get that link up. Any resources additionally that they have to share, or any participants here. If you have anything that's been helpful for you that you'd like to share with us, get that to me today, and I'll send it out to everyone else as well. So
this has been outstanding. I'd like to thank Shea and Larry and David. Excellent job. Thank you, Ray, for facilitating here. You've done an excellent job as well. I'd like to also thank our county directors from the Region 4 area here too, and that'd be Leslie Millis, and also we had Michelle Zachville kind of leaning on things, Darla Olson, and Sarah DeBoer. Excellent job there. Of course, our area director, our regional director, Donovan Olson, too, giving some good leadership to all this program as well. So anyway, thank you everybody. Outstanding. Appreciate all the participants here that were online with us today. Excellent turnout. Very happy. Great program. I think you guys had outstanding information to share, and thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
I'll get some music going one more time. Okay.